with that, I will now start with the first registered speaker, who is Councillor Barbara Coorey. If you could come forward. And just before you start, I understand, if you could just clarify this when you start, that you're speaking as an individual objector, not on behalf of the council. Thank you. Oh, sorry. When you speak, if you can confirm that you're speaking as an individual objector, that you're not speaking on behalf of the council. Thank you.
Sorry, I am here as an individual private citizen. Thank you. But I am a former Deputy Mayor and I'm a current, I'm a lawyer as well. Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I would like the indulgence of the committee, if I may, read out a letter, excerpts of a letter that I sent to King Charles earlier this year, if I may, Madam Chair. It will take a couple of minutes. Your Majesty, King Charles, I hope you're well and in good health. I'm writing to you for your urgent and kind intervention to prevent the demolition of a beautiful Anglican church, St Paul's Bankstown, of which I represent in the local government area of Canterbury Bankstown. I am the former Deputy Mayor of Canterbury Council, which was merged with Bankstown in May 2016, making it one of the largest residential councils in Australia. Unfortunately, Your Majesty, I find myself almost a lone voice as an elected opponent of this unfortunate decision by the New South Wales Anglican Diocese to demolish this wonderful church in toto for high-rise development. In effect, it appears that the diocese has turned into a property developer at the expense of maintaining its history and sense of community in some parts of our city. I note that St Andrew's Church in Lane Cove is being also developed by the Anglican diocese, and this lovely church is being retained whilst an 8-storey building is being built at the back of it, and the diocese needs to be congratulated for doing this for the community. However, I am disappointed that the same standard has not been applied to St Paul's at Bankstown, which is very historically and socially significant, much more than Lane Cove. The former Bankstown Council resolved in 2015 to place an interim heritage order on the site. However, by 2016, they resolved to discontinue with this course of action. By way of background, Your Majesty, I will outline the issues as follows. St Paul's Church is demonstrative of the works of the architect Norman Willard Macpherson, who was responsive to trends in ecclesiastical architecture in the interwar and post-war era. He has designed a number of significant Anglican, Methodist and Congregational churches. The site at 459 Chapel Road, Bankstown, is comprised of the church and rectory with its unusual pre-Reformation and almost monastic grounds. The church fabric is locally noteworthy with quality brickwork and timber joinery and fittings, and the tower provides a stunning landmark for Bankstown. The church has local historic associative significance due to its association documented in the walls, in the windows and furniture and fittings with the involvement of the English and Fitzpatrick families. St Paul's parishioners Alan Richard Moulstone died in 1944 on a HMAS ship hit by the Japanese suicide pilot, and Bruce Marshall died in 1942, World War II in Papua New Guinea, both aged 21 and both have been parishioners of St Paul's. Alan Moulstone was a Sunday school teacher at the church. Bruce Marshall was the son of the minister Hugh Marshall at St Paul's. Of note is the fact that there are 3 other churches designed by Macpherson, which are heritage-listed items by their respective councils, being as follows. The Mossman Uniting Church and Hall, 38A Balmoral Road, Mossman. The Uniting Church Group, comprising the church, the personage and the fence, 134 Waggonga Street, Narooma, Eurobodalla Shire. The All Saints Cathedral Group at Bathurst, 1970 works. 11 Church Street, Bathurst Regional Council. Of note, there exists at least 35 plaques in the garden dedicated to families and World War II veterans and Father Tony Ward, who served at St Paul's for 30 years. Of considerable concern, Your Majesty, is the fact that the ashes of Minister Thomas Ian Lawrence, who passed away in 1981, are interred in the altar of the church. I have also been advised that the ashes of another priest predated the interment of the ashes.
I just need to interrupt you. So that was the 3-minute bill.
Thank you.
So you're seeking another extension to 5 minutes?
Please.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've also been advised that the ashes of another priest predated the interment of the ashes of Minister Lawrence are also under the altar. A further concern is the fact that the ashes of Father Tony Woods are also in the memorial garden of the church. The ashes of 2 World War II veterans are also in the northern memorial garden of the church grounds. Ladies and gentlemen of the panel, I am here as a private citizen. However, I have to say to you, I have never found myself in the position I find myself this evening. I am the most senior elected person on this council, which happens to be one of the largest councils in the country. This church, I believe, should be retained. I am appealing to you for it to be retained. It should be an adaptive reuse of the building. The church has already, the diocese, the Anglican diocese has already set a precedent with Lane Cove. They are prepared to keep that church in the hall. It is of not a significantly historical significance as St. Paul's, but they're prepared to do it in Lane Cove. Is this a tale of two cities where the diocese looks down on my area but is prepared to support other areas? We are desperately in need of retaining our heritage for our local community. And it just stuns me that there is no discussion from the government in relation to this. I do note in the report before you on page 10, it states as part of the timeline, and you'll note that the times I've attempted to retain this building for heritage. November 2024, the last 2 lines state that the department considered the council as the local authority was most appropriately placed to consider any future local listing of the land. I have tried in this very arena to have this building listed as part of the heritage significance, but unfortunately this council is very pro-development, and I do urge you to not go ahead with the demolition DA tonight, to at least defer it. The development application as a state significant development application, I understand, has not been determined by the department, and yet the diocese wants to go ahead and demolish. My view is that this may be a vacant site for many, many years to come. This is a site that has received national significance. It is very, very concerning to me that all the reports, particularly by Sue Rose, and an updated report in 2023, which was not provided to the elected representatives at the time that we deliberated on this particular issue, that concerns me. And as I said, the precedent has already been set by the diocese in Lane Cove. They're prepared to retain that building, but they're not prepared to retain our building. There has been no...
Sorry, you've gone well over the 5 minutes, so I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up now. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair.
So the next speaker I have is the Reverend Dr. John Reynolds Bunyan.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Actually, for some years with heart failure and stress, all those other things, it's very difficult for me now to speak in public, but I thought I should on this occasion. Background: Rector of Chester Hill within the city for 22 years, until retirement in 2001, holding the Archbishop's general licence since then. Aged 89, more than 27 years a weekly volunteer chaplain at Bankstown Hospital, there last Friday. Honorary chaplain of 2 ex-service organisations, patron of Campbelltown's Historical Society, member of the National Trust New South Wales, excuse my breathlessness, the Australian Conservation Foundation, in the UK the National Church Trust, Church Conservation Trust, Friends of Friendless Churches, members of the Australian Sustainable Australian Party, its aims including the decorrupting of politics, environmental protection and stopping overdevelopment. I've known St. Paul's Church since 1978, friend of Father Tony Wood and Father Tom Lawrence, whose earthly remains we know are there. St. Paul's is one of the most important heritage buildings in this city, with a simplified modern Gothic design by the same architect that extended St. Albans Epping. The other significant heritage buildings in Bankstown, church buildings, religious buildings, I think are St. Felix Roman Catholic Church and the Punchbowl Mosque. One has been lost as Jewish people moved away from Bankstown. The Jewish synagogue, which I remember well with the Star of David design, was demolished. We must not lose the other building, the other main building, representing Judeo-Christian spiritual and heritage and significance. The sacred sites of Indigenous Australians and of Muslims would not be destroyed in this way. Christian sacred spaces should be similarly respected, and we are concerned with sacred spaces. The Anglican Church holds its property only under the Anglican Church of Australia Constitution Act of 1961, and an official document of our church called a homily is entirely devoted to reverence for sacred spaces, describing a consecrated church building as a house of God and temple of the Lord. I think there's one other submission to come in, pointing out other major legal obstacles to any demolition. In the past, St Paul's was a true parish church. That means a community church, welcoming all. For example, the many who brought children for baptism every Sunday at 12 o'clock. All accepted without question in the same way that Jesus accepted children, and the parallel is set out in our prayer book, the official standard of worship in our church. With unlawful changes made, traditional worshippers at St Paul's therefore tended to leave, eventually replaced by a congregation of good...
Sorry, that's the 3-minute bell. So do you want another 2 minutes to
yes,
finish? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll get as far as I can. Good people largely indifferent to the significance, however, of the building and to the law and teaching of our church. In any case, there's ample room at St Paul's, and the wealthy diocese can find other means of support for the property and ministry, as it has done in other places, including my own former church, St John Mark's, Chester Hill. A worship space hidden and closed inside the proposed development would not be noticed by those who pass by on foot or in car, whatever outer signage was installed. It would be a hidden conventicle rather than the present historic war memorial parish church of Bankstown, with its unique physical and visible witness on Chapel Road to Christianity, the original part of this now diverse community. At Bankstown Hospital, on the 26th of September, a detailed sample census of patients showed that 260 patients identified as Christian, 62 as Muslim, almost 4 times as many Christians as Muslim. But in the city generally, as we know, about a quarter of the people are Muslim, and noting Muslim regard for its holy places here and overseas, and Muslim concern for good architecture, and noting that the best Jews and Christians and Muslims have some important spiritual concerns in common, I hope local Muslims will, if need be, also support the retention of St Paul's, helping in this way, as others, especially traditional law-abiding Anglicans, are helping to bring about, if not tonight, once and for all, the dismissal of this dreadful big money dream, and big money is involved, and by establishing once and for all the important heritage of status of St Paul's. I think I better stop there. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. I'll just check. Did anyone have any questions? Thank you for coming along this evening, and
thank you for the invitation.
Take your time getting back to your seat. Thank you. So the next speaker I have registered is Antoinette Ravkin to read the objection of Lola Moulstone. Thank you. Please proceed.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and panel. I've been asked to read out a letter that Mrs. Lola Moulstone has written. At 97, she's very mentally sharp, but it's physically difficult for her to get here. And this is her letter. I've been involved in some... Speak up? Okay. I have been involved in St Paul's Church for all of my 97 years. I was married there. My 5 children were christened, confirmed, and several were also married in the church. My parents' funerals were held in the church, and I am devastated and outraged that you are planning to destroy our history. My parents were involved in fundraising to build a new church. My father, Frank Margulies, was a rector's warden at the time of his death. My mother, Amy Margulies, was on the flower roster and belonged to the Ladies' Guild. They regularly held street stalls, fetes and bus trips. The latter was really appreciated by folk without transport. Of course, a cup of tea was also supplied. Alan Maunsell, of who you've already heard, whose memorial chair donated by his friends rests within the sanctuary. I am deeply disturbed to think that this and other memorials will be erased from the historical and spiritual home. And did you know that the original St. Paul's Church, now the church hall, also served the community as a book library that was open to all? As a small child who attended St. Paul's with my parents, I was always delighted to have access to this library. At that time, there wasn't a library in Bankstown. St. Paul's Rectory is the birthplace of St. Paul's Choir School. In 1984, Father Tony Ward established the choir with 15 students. Today, it's Georges River Grammar School. The church is part of a large community. It has deep historical roots and still has the power to enrich, to love, and to embrace not just those who worship within, but to be of great comfort to any member of the community, regardless of their faith. Is it really a progressive act to demolish such a significantly historical building, or are we witnessing a voracious greed that would seem to be more frequently in our modern world? Yours faithfully, Mrs. Lola Moulstone.
Thank you. I'll just check if there are any questions.
No, okay, thanks.
Thank you for coming along this evening. Thank you. The next speaker I have registered is Bing Wu from the Save St. Paul Bankstown Incorporated.
Hi everyone, my name is Bing Wu. I speak today as an artist and the parishioner of St. Paul's Church for almost 20 years. And as an also an unofficial historian who has witnessed the long journey of this parish community. Since 2016, when St. Paul's first began to discussions about the redevelopment, many parishioners have left to nearby church. We were initially told that the survey was to explore the church's future, but only later discovered that redevelopment would mean the demolition of St. Paul's. We were told that this would secure the ministerial income through the new apartments. Some faithful members stayed, but many of us experienced the fear and the criticism, even silence within our own church, when we continued to raise the objection to the demolition. In 2021, Bankstown Council resumed the St. Paul site for 11-storey apartments. Then in 2023, the Canterbury Bankstown Council master plan increased this to 18 stories. Now, under the statewide accelerated program, TOD, the site has been resumed again, this time for a 23-story residential tower with 185 apartments and mixed commercial use. You may have heard that the council claim it has fought tooth and nail to have St. Paul's heritage listed. The truth tells a different story. Over the last 10 years, despite multiple independent heritage assessments commissioned by council, all concluding that St. Paul is locally significant, the site was repeatedly excluded from Heritage Register. Even Heritage New South Wales urged St. Paul's be added to the local environment plan, given it clearly has a range of local heritage value. While parishioners were told that the heritage listing would put the council in charge of St. Paul's instead of God. Our minister even claimed that God has said St. Paul will not be demolished if we sign the petition.
Sorry, that was the 3-minute bell. So do you need another 2 minutes?
Yes,
Thank you.
please, 2 minutes. Imply that those who object were somehow opposing God. But St. Paul itself is a living testament, built through the dedication, fundraising, in the face of generations of parishioners. It holds deeper social and spiritual significance for Bankstown. It is also the final resting place for our fallen Anzac heroes, ex-servicemen, priests, parishioners, and the notable English family. The foundational stone was laid in 1938, completed in 1961, and its 1968 consecration deed declared the church and the land were forever hereafter separated, dedicated, and consecrated for Anglican worship, establishing a bond of trust for a benefit of the local congregation. As a heritage expert, Dr. Sue Rosen from Sue Rosen Associates and Jeff Ashley from Ashley Built Heritage stated in their joined 2023 letter to the council CEO and the councillors, while we believe that St. Paul's easily qualify for heritage listing based on the New South Wales heritage criteria, it is the love for St. Paul's strongly demonstrated by Bankstown community that should now be listened to. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just check. Are there any questions?
Okay.
No questions. Thank you for coming along this evening. The next speaker is Roy Lumby.
Madam Chair, panel members, I'm Dr. Roy Lumby. I'm a heritage consultant with about 35 years' experience in the realm of architectural conservation. What I'm saying may have been touched on by Bing Wu, but with your permission, I should like to proceed. I was co-author of the respected heritage practitioner Sue Rosen and Associates St. Paul's Church Heritage Assessment Supplement, which was a response to the IHO that was placed on St. Paul's Church in 2015. This was commissioned by council and it recommended listing the church for several reasons. So the church has historical significance, showing evidence of the historical development of Bankstown and evidence of its social history. It is tangible evidence of the pre- and post-World War II growth and consolidation of Bankstown. It has historical associations with locally significant families, several of whom are memorialised in the very fabric of the church. It is also associated with architect Norman Macpherson, who designed quite a large number of churches in New South Wales between 1930 and 1970 and is regarded as one of the finest exponents of church architecture in that period in the state. Several are heritage listed, the latest one being the Church of St Albans at Epping, which is very similar in appearance to St Paul's. It too shares a similar history of being an extension of a 1930s church added to in the early 1960s. It too is the subject of potential development. The church is retained and residential buildings are to be constructed behind the church. St Paul's has aesthetic significance for its architectural qualities, notably the embodiment of pre-war Romanesque and the post-war ecclesiastical styles. It has great townscape value, and the spatial character, along with the integrity of its interior, is also noteworthy. The church is socially significant to present-day community members and parishioners past and present, and it's representative of the development of religious architecture during the middle third of the 20th century, and also representative of the architectural styles that I mentioned a little earlier. Now, this assessment was supported by the findings of several respected heritage practitioners. Jeff Ashley of Ashley Built Heritage peer-reviewed the report, and the peer review was commissioned by council. Subsequently, Extent Heritage did a local government-wide heritage study commissioned by council in 2021. Godden Mackay Logan's 2024 Bankstown State-led rezoning heritage significant report. Both of these acknowledge the heritage.
Oh, sorry, that's the 3-minute bell. Are you seeking another 2 minutes?
If
I could.
Thank you.
Thank you. So all of these reports, most of which were commissioned, if not all of them, by council, strongly supported the listing of the building. Heritage New South Wales has also written to council requesting it to reconsider listing the church, but evidently with no response. Council's Heritage Advisory Committee supported listing, but council instead seems to have accepted Graham Brooks Associates and Weir Phillips' peer review of this report, which forms part of the applicant's submission. Now, I've read the general conditions of consent appended to the notes attached to this agenda tonight, and should the panel support recommendations for demolition, and I hope this does not happen, the following conditions should apply to the consent because of the significance of the building. The archival recording should be expanded to include measured drawings of the site and the building, and they should be in accordance with the published DCC EEW guidelines. Future approvals should ensure a dedicated place of worship in future development for the community. So consent conditions should include a place of worship, an interpretation strategy, plan and implementation of interpretation, which could include salvaged items. That is, all of this should be readily accessible to the community. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just check if there are any questions.
Thank you.
Look, I do have one. Sorry, Doctor.
Yes,
I had a question. Just in what you just said a minute ago about future development applications ensuring that there's a place of public worship on the site, just picking up on that point that you made about any future application requiring a place of public worship on the site. Do you see that as, so we've got the built heritage and social heritage, do you see that as an important element of that site, that it should have a place of public worship?
Yes, it's been associated with worship since the early 20th century, and it's an integral and important part of the history of the community of Bankstown.
Yes. So, but that would apply to schools, for example, like a school site, you know, a public hall, you know, a local community hall. But you basically, what you're saying is, so I just understand it, that because there's been a place of public worship, or I'll just call it a church, or on this site for so long, that site should always have a place of public worship.
Well, as part of the interpretation of the site, and obviously these things depend upon the circumstances of each individual site.
Yeah.
But I think the significance of the site as a place of worship is sufficiently important as part of the heritage of the place for that to continue.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
No, thank you. The next speaker is Vassili Xanthakos.
Okay, good afternoon, members of the panel. I represent the often undermined young people of Canterbury Bankstown. Today is a sombre day. It marks not merely the proposed demolition of all existing structures, but the potential erasure of nearly a century of faith, community, and remembrance, the loss of both our Anzac heritage and our spiritual identity. The proposal before you is fundamentally incongruent with Council's own vision. The Canterbury Bankstown Connective City 2036 plan states the city's historic places and places of character are largely preserved. These places have a sense of community, identity, and belonging that the local community is proud of. That pride echoes here tonight in the chamber. Council's Development Control Plan, Chapter 6.2, Bankstown City Centre, revised only months ago, in Section 2.1, Principle 9, further directs that the design of new development at St. Paul's Anglican Church should maximise the use of existing building fabric, such as stained glass windows, masonry, and the iconic bell tower. Surrounding developments should be complementary and include landscaping and materiality that complements the church building. That guidance is even illustrated beside in the rendering of St. Paul's, standing proud in its modest yet imposing stature. Yet the proposed state-significant development bears no resemblance to what our returned servicemen, their families, or council envisioned. It's a macabre pastiche of borrowed elements assembled into a so-called multi-purpose space, not a place of devotion. This is not preservation, it's desecration. Nearby St. Euphemia Church, built in 1964, stands as proof that heritage and progress can coexist, but only when preservation is prioritised. All Saints Belmore, originally All Saints Anglican, was redeveloped in the same period and has maintained its exclusive use as a public place of worship. The same can be said for St. Stephanus in Helston Park, which was also erected in the 1930s, originally St. Stephen's Anglican Church, still used as a primary place of worship. Built by returned servicemen and their families, St. Paul's is a tangible memorial to their sacrifice for my generation. For nearly a century, it has served as a place of worship and reflection, a constant symbol of continuity through every social and economic change. Now it faces destruction, not through neglect, but in the name of redevelopment. A multi-purpose space within the tower cannot replace what St. Paul's represents. A church is a sacred space, set apart to meet the spiritual and communal needs of its people. Those needs cannot be condensed into an annex of a commercial project. This proposal is presented as progress, but progress without preservation, in truth, is loss. When our servicemen returned from war, they built St. Paul's to honour both their faith and their fallen comrades. To demolish it now would be to dishonour that legacy, placing profits before profits with a PH. Even in the great cities such as London, development respects its heritage. St. Paul's Cathedral still defines the skyline around it. Heritage should guide the future, not be erased by it. Bankstown and St. Paul's deserve that same respect. I'm nearly done. Multiple independent heritage assessments recognise the church's local significance as a rare surviving example of mid-20th century ecclesiastical architecture and an irreplaceable link to the district's cultural history. Members of the panel, once a church of this meaning is gone, it cannot be rebuilt. What replaces it may provide density, but not depth, accommodation, but not identity. I respectfully ask the panel to protect St. Paul's on behalf of the young people of Canterbury Bankstown, to preserve our future, to preserve not only a building, but the faith, memory, and the community it embodies.
Thank you. I'll just check. Are there any questions? Thank you for coming along this evening. So that's the last of the members of the